Hello class, my name is Raquel Reyes. My presentation and graduate research project is on the study and concept of the connection between corporate psychopaths and bullying in the workplace. Throughout the presentation, I will go over what constitutes a corporate psychopath and he or she's involvement with bullying in the workplace. Additionally, I will present several peer-reviewed studies that both support the theory that corporate psychopaths exist and are primarily responsible for abusive behavior in the workplace, such as bullying, as well as a few studies that negate the connection. The limitations of each of the studies will be discussed throughout the presentation, as well as after the discussion of the study that I conducted. Finally, I will provide a few suggestions on future research opportunities, including why this area of study is so important to consider. So let's get started. Verbal abuse, threats, humiliation, loss of control, exclusion, and intimidation are all signs consistent with bullying in the workplace. In a perfect world, one would be able to go to work each day without having to worry about whether he or she will fall victim to the workplace bully. No one looks forward to coming to work if the environment is hostile. Recent findings estimate the rate of workplace bullying, which is the percentage of employees who perceive themselves as having been subjected to bullying behaviors at work, at an average of 14.6% worldwide. A 2017 survey by the Workplace Bullying Institute estimated that 61% of U.S. employees are aware of abusive conduct in the workplace. 19% have experienced it, and another 19% have witnessed it. Bullying in the workplace affects the victim's physical and psychological health. Many victims of workplace bullying experience high levels of stress, anxiety, panic attacks, PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and high blood pressure. Additionally, workers with lower self-esteem and confidence levels may disengage from their work responsibilities, therefore decreasing productivity. As a result, when bullying is taking place, an organization may experience higher turnover rates, higher absenteeism, and lower levels of morale, even possible lawsuits. Consequently, workplace bullying costs the company money in the long term. Identifying potential candidates for new positions who exhibit psychopathic personality traits may enable an organization to make better decisions before the hiring process takes place. The purpose of this study is to determine whether certain personality traits present in clinical psychopathy are predictors of bullying in the workplace. A person exhibiting psychopathic behavior is antisocial, aggressive, manipulative, reckless, and deceitful. Corporate psychopaths are simply psychopaths who successfully exist within society and work within corporate environments. They are conceptualized as highly career-oriented, but are ruthless, unethical, and exploitive employees, with about 3.5% of corporate psychopaths holding a position of at least a senior level within the organization. The hypothesis of this study is that there will be a positive correlation that a person who exhibits the psychopathic personality traits described will also inflict or participate in the described activities of bullying in the workplace. Nowadays, the terms workplace bully and corporate psychopath are receiving a lot of the same heat. It stands to argue that this is because the common bully and clinical psychopath share several of the same characteristics and behaviors. Personality traits present in bullies and workplace psychopaths include narcissism, lack of self-regulation, lack of remorse, lack of conscience, taking credit for another person's work, and the skill of manipulation. Bullying is the act of repeating behaviors that are unreasonable and may cause or have the potential of causing harm. Workplace bullies and corporate psychopaths display behaviors that include social and physical isolation, withholding information or resources from subordinates, undermining others, public criticism, gossiping, assigning unreasonable workloads or deadlines, and excessively monitoring the work of others. Reyes et al. 2017 conducted a study that consisted of 2 groups within the United States and a sample that resided in the Netherlands. The sample groups included 1,559 prison or mental health offenders that resided in the National Institute of Mental Health, 3,954 offenders in the Wisconsin State Prison, and an additional 1,937 Dutch offenders that resided in the Netherlands, all who were considered violent and mentally disordered. As all of the members in each of the groups were predominantly male with an average age of 30 to 39 years old. However, it is important to note that within the study, the sample group of participants in the United States generally contained non-mentally ill prisoners, and the Dutch sample contained primarily forensic psychiatric patients. The study resulted in a positive correlation in all 3 groups between psychopathy and the central personality trait for the lack of empathy and remorse. The Hare Psychopathy Checklist Revised, or the PCLR, outlines characteristics used to determine whether a person is considered psychopathic. The PCLR assessments are in-depth interviews completed by trained personnel that use the predetermined rating scale. The PCLR includes questions that relate to factors such as fearlessness, callousness or lack of empathy, detachedness, level of manipulative, pathological lying, poor behavior control, and antisocial traits. The PCLR assessment consists of 20 items and uses a 3-point scoring system that ranges from 0 to 40. Subjects that score 30 or higher are considered psychopaths. Bodie conducted a study in 2011 that consisted of 346 well-educated white-collar workers. 53.8% of them were male. They were between the ages of 21 and 60, with 60.5% being over the age of 40, all of whom completed a self-reported questionnaire. It is important to note that in the questionnaire, the respondents were asked if they had ever worked with a manager they considered to be dysfunctional. And the dysfunctional manager was defined as someone who works in an abnormal, unhealthy, or disturbed manner, so they can't perform all or part of their managerial functions properly. If the respondents had worked with a dysfunctional manager, then they were asked questions about that manager as well as about their current manager in the rest of the questionnaire. Based on the results, there was a strong correlation between the occurrence of workplace bullying and the presence of a corporate psychopath. Consequently, an astounding 93.3% of the employees witnessed unfavorable bullying behavior when working in organizations where corporate psychopaths were present. Further, the research found that 26% of all the incidents of individuals ever witnessing unfavorable treatment of others, which is considered bullying, at work, are associated with the presence of corporate psychopaths. This corresponds with the literature that on organizational psychopaths, which states that they engage in bullying behavior such as humiliation of others, verbal abuse, and unwarranted criticism. Comparatively, Valentine, Fleischman, and Godman's 2018 questionnaire of 356 sales professionals who were on average 39 years old and predominantly white, with 70% being males and about 60% revealed that bullying experiences and psychopathic attributes are positively related. Measures utilized in previous business ethics and psychology studies were incorporated into this particular investigation. In addition, an ethics scenario was developed to evaluate the individual's ethical reasoning. The scenarios were used to stimulate the subject's ethical decision-making by requiring them to complete a series of measures linked to these problems. One such ethics scenario was developed for use in this study and focused on a situation in which a salesperson is marginalized by another colleague who exhibits latent psychopathy, which includes things such as high impression management, manipulation, political self-serving, and subtle things of that nature. It also uses milder forms of bullying characterized by incivility, which is taking sales accounts, building coalitions, treating others poorly. Furthermore, they contend that these subtle forms of psychopathy and bullying are more likely in organizations, so it enhanced the realism, the relevance, and the external validity of the present study. Nevertheless, the content of the scenario should effectively manipulate latent psychopathy and covert bullying instead of more commonly experienced and less severe problems such as generalized interpersonal conflict. The various ethics measures were introduced immediately after the presentation of the scenario. Individuals' bullying experiences were evaluated with 22 items from the Negative Acts questionnaire. The respondents were asked to indicate how often they had been subjected to a list of negative acts in the workplace during the past year, and their responses were provided with 0 as never, 1 occasionally less than monthly, 2 monthly, 3 weekly, and 4 daily, with higher scores suggesting increased frequency. The findings suggest that covert bullying and latent psychopathy are pertinent in Salesforce behavior. For example, the finding that psychopathic attributes were consistently associated with weakened ethical reasoning. The scenario highlights the potential consequences of latent psychopathy, manipulative, and deviant behavior in an organization. As we've discussed, there are several personal and organizational impacts to bullying and corporate psychopathy. The effects not only impact the employees experiencing or witnessing the abusive behavior, but also affect the organization as a whole. The target of a bully will experience both physical, emotional, and psychological side effects of the exposure to the adverse treatment. Kaponikia et al. 2012 point out that many victims falling prey to such acts experience depression, feelings of anxiety, signs of PTSD, sleeplessness, nausea, and fatigue. Furthermore, Parker 2014 links several emotional responses that included shock, despair, anger, and helplessness to bullying. Moreover, employees who are victims of bullying are at high risk for suicide, have negative attitude towards work, experience lower psychological health, and are at a higher risk of general health issues. As a result, a target of a workplace bullying has an overall decrease in his or her performance and diminishing levels of workplace morale and motivation, which, in turn, reduces productivity and increases turnover. Additionally, the research study by Valentin et al. 2018 revealed a positive relationship between unethical corporate values and bullying. Unfortunately, research also shows that a person who is a receptor of bullying is more likely to bully others in retaliation, especially when his or her attitudes are consistent with latent psychopathy. Valentin et al. 2018. These findings are significant when assessing the overall effect that both corporate psychopaths and bullying have on the organization as a whole. For example, when a member of management bullies a person, the retaliation put forth by the victim of being counterproductive at work ends up hurting the organization rather than the specific instigator of the bullying. Bodie 2011 brings to the forefront, for example, the cost to a company that bullying and corporate psychopaths inflict, citing that bullying costs the United Kingdom economy 13.75 billion lira per year, which equates to approximately 18.4 billion US dollars. Consequently, the organization may experience damage to its reputation. Parker 2014. Regrettably, most of the participants in Parker's 2014 study described the workplace bully as the ultimate silencer, as most of the women's supervisors employed verbal tactics aimed to shut down the women's complaints by either ignoring the comments or making fun of the person in public. The women described their bully bosses as ridiculing and threatening and often reprimanding the women when their differing opinions were shared. In light of this type of environment, the women did not feel safe or welcome within the organization. It's no wonder why their fear of retaliation increased their levels of anxiety and insecurity about the working environment. When psychopaths are in a position that requires specific responsibilities, they use their jobs within an organization as a means of gaining power over others to extend their self-interest. Vindictive leaders callously disregard the needs of others and have no problem lying, have a high probability to cheat, and bully the people they work with. Consequently, organizations who have leaders that exhibit characteristics of psychopathy and who may employ tactics of bullying towards the staff are found to be disorganized, chaotic, and poorly managed. Additionally, as Valentine et al. 2018 points out, when the organization's environment is unethical, the behaviors associated with corporate psychopaths and organizational bullying tends to be more prevalent. Parker 2014 pointed out that 72% of bullies in the workplace were members of leadership and outranked their targets by at least one level. Although 72% is a shocking statistic of workplace bullies, it doesn't mean that all the members of leadership portray bullying behavior. Leadership that's tough and demanding of its staff is acceptable. However, if leadership singles out a subset of employees to receive severe treatment, most will consider the tactic as bullying. It makes sense that a corporate psychopath uses the tactic of bullying to intimidate subordinates, as psychopaths typically have no regard for others and they quite enjoy the act of hurting people. Parker's 2014 research study consisted of 31 female workers between the ages of 25 and 62 with at least a bachelor's degree. Revealed that approximately 90% of the participants described their experiences with their supervisors as bullying. The remaining 10% of the women described their supervisors as hostile and poor communicators, but did not feel them to be bullies. Interestingly enough, 65% of the women answered to a male boss. A limitation to this particular study includes the sample size only consisting of 31 female workers. The gender was not varied and the sample size was very small. In Bodie's 2017 study of the corporate psychopath CEO, the bullying caused employees to withdraw and ultimately leave the company. Additional outcomes also included declines in the organizational revenue, commitment of employees, and a significant decline in creativity and innovation. Bodie interviewed an employee in the UK about a newly appointed CEO who presented with all 10 characteristics of a corporate psychopath, as is outlined in a measure of corporate psychopathy called Psychopathy Measurement Research Version 2. The measure asked coworkers of the subject to rate the subject on whether he or she is initially charming, poised and calm, untruthful, cheating, egocentric, remorseless, emotionally shallow, interpersonally unresponsive, irresponsible, and lacking in self-blame. The results of the study concluded that the CEO was found to rule by a fear and intimidation and deny any real voice to his subordinates. Additionally, the new CEO would seek out others' opinions and then go against the consensus in a public way by demeaning the respondents. The psychopathic CEO is reported to want to control every small decision in the office while simultaneously ignoring and not providing leadership on the larger issues of strategy and policy implementation. Employees were reported to have lost their enthusiasm for their jobs and to have become aimless and directionless in terms of their workplace activities. Stress-related illnesses due to a lack of leadership and a bullying environment were reported to be a factor in the decline's organization's performance. Absence due to illness was reported to have gone from once-a-month occurrence for a single employee under the former CEO to a daily occurrence for 4 employees under the psychopathic CEO. Prevalence of psychopaths in the workplace. There's much debate as to how common psychopaths may or may not be within a corporate setting. Much of the research on the presence of psychopaths in the workplace tends to focus their studies on victims of workplace bullies. Additionally, debate continues to arise regarding the methodology in which one determines the level of psychopathy present within an individual. Caponicia et al. 2012 provided an analysis of the results of an online questionnaire taken by 307 Australian workers. 161 were female, 40 male, and 106 participants did not declare their demographics. They were between the ages of 18 and 60. Of the 307 respondents, a significant portion experienced bullying. Additionally, the study was consistent and revealed that people who experience bullying are more likely to label a coworker as psychopathic and more likely to rate the existence of psychopathy in the workplace higher than someone not bullied. Furthermore, the results of the study suggested that the experience of being a target of a bullying created an inclination to associate a coworker's bad behavior with the personality trait of psychopathy. In contrast, Bodie 2011 found a strong positive correlation between workplace psychopaths and bullying. The study showed that as corporate psychopathy increased, so did bullying and the witnessing of bullying with a positive coefficient. Bodie mentioned it was important to keep in mind that approximately 29% of corporate psychopaths also engage in acts of bullying. Additionally, Bodie's study revealed that in organizations that did not have corporate psychopaths present, employees witness bullying less than once a month, while when a corporate psychopath is present, they witness bullying more than once a week. These percentages are quite unnerving, especially when one considers that 26% of all bullies are also corporate psychopaths. In light of popular writings, the conception that psychopaths are common in the workplace is misleading. Moreover, it may be easier for someone to cope with the effects that a problematic coworker has on him or her due to undesirable behaviors by merely implying that the problematic coworker has something profoundly wrong with his or her personality. Thus, Composenicia et al. Warned that due to the diagnostic checklist readily available to everyone, the chances of mislabeling or misdiagnosing of people as psychopathic just because of the unacceptable behaviors that he or she exhibits in the workplace is very high. Furthermore, people should think very carefully about referencing a person's actions instead of using a range of characteristics used to describe a psychopath, as such accusations can prove to be damaging to a person's reputation. In order to identify personality traits consistent with bullies and psychopaths, the research methodology will consist of the administration of a multi-dimensional survey. Additionally, there will be observational recordings of nonverbal communication of the participant during the survey completion. Previous research has focused on the responses of subjects to surveys, but has left out the importance of a person's nonverbal communication and mannerisms. The study used a voluntary group of adult men and women who work within the United States and in corporate settings, primarily in the human resources field. The study consisted of a sample size of 385 participants to account for a margin of error. Since the personality traits of bullies and psychopaths are present across a spectrum of races and ethnic backgrounds, there was not a significant need to focus on one particular subgroup for this study. The primary reason for the study is to determine whether certain personality traits are predictors of behavior and attitudes consistent in bullying. Due to the voluntary nature of the participation selection, the gender distribution varied and consisted of 172 men, 168 women, and 45 participants that did not declare their gender for the study. All of the volunteers were in the corporate sector and fell between the ages of 21 and 60 years old. The volunteers for the study did not receive compensation for participating in the study. The acceptance of volunteers meeting the industry and age requirements was on a first-come, first-served basis in response to emails distributed within the organization's emailing system. Participants of the human resources corporate sector were the sample group due to the nature of the study. There are two reasons to focus on the human resources department. First, most human resources department are the go-to department for employee complaints. Secondly, human resources employees are typically well-versed in company policies. Each respondent was required to read and sign a waiver of consent before participating in the study. The waiver advised the participant that all the responses are confidential, but that demographic information would be collected and associated back to the responses provided due to the nature of the study. The participants of the study did not know the specific personality traits and behaviors central to the study. The study was multidimensional and was 140 questions in length. It consisted of both multiple choice questions as well as a variety of short answer responses. Additionally, the survey design consisted of questions that measure personality and behavioral responses to situations and circumstances that one would typically encounter within a corporate or group environment. The survey was not self-administered. The researcher administered the survey portion of the study to all the participants at approximately the same 4-hour interval, 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. on any given day. The researcher introduced herself by first name only and did not disclose any information about her profession. Additionally, a third party was in the room to record the participants' nonverbal responses to questions asked. Introductions did not take place between the observer and the participant of the study. Before scheduling the interview process, the subject received a copy of the waiver via email for the study taking place. The email advised the subject to review the document before scheduling the interview. Prior review of the waiver enabled the researcher to eliminate ineligible participants in advance who decided to decline participation. Interviews were scheduled at least 1 week in advance to allow for the probability of rescheduling appointments or finding replacements for potential cancellations. Upon arrival at a predetermined location, the subject received the waiver previously reviewed by a host. The participant was asked to read the waiver in full and encouraged to ask any clarifying questions he or she may have before signing the document. The participants were advised that participation in the study is entirely voluntary. The subject was also advised that if at any time he or she wishes to stop the interview, he or she may do so without any negative consequences. Additionally, the host highlighted the verbiage within the waiver, stating that the study is confidential and that after the study concludes, he or she will receive a copy of the study. Once the waiver was signed, the host led the participant to a separate room within the building. The host did not engage with the subject or provide any additional information about the study. In the event the subject asked a question about the study, the host informed the subject that he or she does not have any details regarding the study, and that he or she will receive additional details upon arrival at the secondary location. Once the subject arrived at the secondary location, which was a separate interview room, the host departed without acknowledging the researcher or the observer inside the room. As soon as the door closed behind the participant, the researcher stepped forward and introduced herself by first name only, offering her right hand to shake. The researcher sat down at the table with the 2 chairs on either side, one for herself and one for the subject. Towards the back of the room, the silent observer did not introduce themselves or join the others at the table. The third party at the back of the room had a clipboard and was directed to be as discreet as possible while taking notes of the participants' nonverbal behavior and mannerisms throughout the interview. Before the interview began, the researcher explained to the participant that a series of questions would be asked and will vary between multiple choice questions and short answer responses. The survey administrator also informed the subject that it's important to answer each question truthfully and to ask for clarification on any terminology if needed. The duration of the interviews varied based on the length of short answer responses, the understanding of the terminology throughout the survey, and the level of comfort the participant had within the given environment. Upon completion of the survey, the researcher expressed her gratitude for the subject's participation in the research study and accompanied the participant to the lobby or main entrance of the building. The host then escorted the participant out of the building. The first part of the study consisted of 120 closed-ended questions and focused on the Big 5 personality traits. The benefits of utilizing a closed-ended questionnaire include the ease of verification and the ability to analyze fixed data. Additionally, closed-ended questions are quick, saving time in the interview process. During the second part of the study, an additional 20 questions, inspired by the Hare psychopathy checklist, used the 3-point scale. The researcher that interviewed the participants asked 140 questions, focused on personality and levels of psychopathy. The observer recorded the nonverbal responses and reactions of the participants during the interview. The collection of the informational data throughout the interview was qualitative due to the non-numerical component of received responses. The researcher and observer focused on unraveling the similar personality traits displayed by each subject. They were interested in determining whether certain traits are drivers of specific psychopathic behaviors or tendencies. The researcher conducting the interview analyzed and interpreted the multi-choice questions through structured deductive reasoning. However, the short answer questions required the researcher to summarize and categorize the information to identify potential trends and patterns. Likewise, the researcher interpreted the data before concluding results. Similarly, the observer had the challenge of observing the nonverbal communication presented during each question. It was crucial that the observer paid attention to record any physical responses displayed by the subject from the moment he or she stepped into the room throughout each question and upon concluded of the interview. The process of discourse analysis was utilized during the session by the observer. By utilizing the process of discourse analysis, the observer was able to focus on the language used and the way in which the participant communicated the message. The data analysis followed the process of coding. The researcher and observer used coding to interpret the topics, issues, similarities, and differences that each of the participants revealed throughout the interviews. In vivo coding was used to code the language of the participants, whereas pattern coding was used to determine the patterns within the responses, as they relate to personality traits and behaviors. As shown in the results table, at least 33% of the sampling group scored high in the personality trait of neuroticism. Additionally, approximately 26% of the sample scored mid-range on the psychopath assessment. There were several limitations to the studies described within the presentation. However, additional limitations include the findings restricted to the use of only one instrument, in this case the PCLR, as a measurement for psychopathy. Additional limitations include limited sample size in several of the studies, and with low response rates in some of the studies, it could have been driven by a lack of concern or interest in the part of the participants. However, it is noted that some of the studies did contain questionnaires that were extremely long in length, and that could have been a contributing factor as well. In addition, because the data was gathered using self-reported questionnaires in some cases, the same source creates a bias and may not have captured the full issues or effects that were taking place in the organization. Limitations of the study that I conducted. One of the limitations of using a close-ended question creates the possibility of bias due to the limitation of the available respondents for the participant. Since the observer interpreted nonverbal responses of the participant, the information collected was subjective, and unfortunately there is no statistical test that exists that can quickly identify the reliability or the validity of qualitative data. Additionally, limiting the sample to employees in the human resources industry may not be a full representation of the population in the corporate sector. And finally, because moral emotions can be faked, it is suggested that organizations conduct thorough screening of candidates before hiring or promoting occurs. A suggestion for future research includes the method in which the data is grouped and analyzed. Future studies may want to perform a constant comparative analysis of the data in order to determine the relationships between other facets of the participant's personality or behavior. Future research studies of this nature will also need to recognize the difficulty in accurate recording of nonverbal communication by using a SQL interpreter. Future research should explore how moral reasoning is related to bullying and psychopathy, using scenarios highlighting misconduct that's more overt. Further assessments of mediation should also be conducted to determine whether bullying experiences in psychopathy affect the relationships among other individual characteristics, organizational factors, and ethical reasoning. The research project intended to identify personality traits in